Hi, folks, for Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the amount of rental properties in the big cities. So we're talking like Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and so on. The big cities that are being rented out to foreign students. This is primarily from India, but then China coming second, but India by far and away the first. And you've got the other sort of subcontinent folks thrown in there like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Nepal, and so on. Now, the numbers of students in Australia are supposedly about 1 million. No one actually knows, because apart from the legitimate universities, there's also a vast array of NGO, sham, scam, what are called ghost colleges. They're really nothing other than just labour hire firms and masquerading as colleges. And then students come out and say they're studying, business or whatever at these colleges. But the colleges actually don't exist in reality. Again, they're just a labour hire firm that are farming out cheap labour for the Indian, take-out food shops and Chinese cafes, all that sort of stuff. It's just slave labor, just a conduit for peasant slave labor to be brought into the West and then farmed out to these businesses, so that are invariably, or certainly nearly all of them, are owned by Indians and Chinese. It's created a substrata economy that relies completely on slave labor to exist. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So no one knows actually the number of students, whether they be real students. If we look at the number of students that are enrolled in universities, it's supposed to be somewhere in the 800,000 range, but even that's a bit vague. There are students that might do, say, a 2-3 year course, diploma or degree, and then they stay on for another year, or they drop out for a year, then go back to college and study some more. But their whole purpose of coming to Australia isn't to study or to get a degree, far from it. It's to find a backdoor way of getting citizenship into the West. And if you come from a third world shithole like India or Pakistan or something, you'll do pretty much anything to get citizenship in a nice, rich, white Western country, well ordered, lots of money to loot and so on. So that's their primary motive. And again, there'll be exceptions to that, but that's their primary motive. And they come out in vast numbers to do that. Now, when the Australian universities, and this is applicable all across the West really at the time, when they kicked off this mad grab for bringing in as many foreign students as they could, targeting the wealthier ones, the children of the Communist Party generals in China and the richer Brahmins in India and that sort of thing. I was involved in some of the earlier conversations here. I wasn't a decision maker or policy maker, but I was part of some of the groups that were discussing it back then. And it wasn't for long. And to me, I saw the obvious flaws in it. And that was just me. I mean, what do I know? But I had a lot of experience at that point in international business, and I was telling the folks at the universities, look, if you're going to offer this to Indians, they're not going to want to they're not coming for an education. They will consider that once they've paid you the money, and the richer Brahmins can afford the big bucks, they can afford the $50,000 a year of fees and this sort of thing. Once they pay the money, they will assume they have paid for that bit of paper. That is the payment. It's not their performance in exams, not how hard they study, have they mastered the subject and topic. They won't see it that way. They'll see it that they have paid you for that bit of paper. That's how they would view it in India. And it's a very corrupt society. Everything is done by corruption and bribery, bakshish as it's called. So you get these students and you will be obligated to just become a degree factory and just churn out degrees. So you'll have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people coming from India, which is how it is now. And they're all going to expect, hey, I've paid you for the fucking degree. I want it. And if my kid's out partying and doing drugs and hitting the nightclubs and doesn't bother hitting the books, don't care. I've paid you that money. And I want my kid to get that fucking bit of paper. It's a prestige thing. It's a bragging rights thing. My son or daughter's been to a Western university and got a PhD with honours and 3 PhDs, and so on and so forth. So that's what it is. Chinese the same. The Chinese would be diligent, but some of them don't speak a word of English and still get their PhD. So the Western universities have just become now degree factories for the wealthy and the well-to-do in these third world countries. So, or middle income countries, as you would call China now. So they've debased their own currency and made the degrees worthless, and they have this ravenous appetite for getting these high fee-paying students from, again, places like India. Now, the second thing that sort of concerned me there was a lot of talk then, but all these fees we're going to get will be able to give a better education to local students. So local Australian kids that may not have had an opportunity to go to university because the fees would have been too expensive. We'll give them a cheaper, they'll have a less expensive. It won't cost them so much money to go to university, and we'll be able to, with all this extra money, we can put better teaching resources into, educating the local kids so they'll have a tip-top quality education. That also didn't play out, and I saw that in the beginning as well. That even though you're going to have all this extra money, it's going to get gobbled up by and chewed up by affirmative action and DEI and all sorts of things. That they'll be handing out scholarships to black lesbians for equal outcomes and equity and so on and so forth. So all the money will be squandered on that. On top of that, hundreds of thousands of new employees have been now employed in the education sector, particularly the tertiary education sector, and again, it's all DEI and affirmative action, and people that wouldn't have been able to, get a job teaching kindergarten have now, through affirmative action and DEI, have now got jobs teaching PhD level or supposedly teaching PhD level students. Similarly, it was also clear that once the bar was lowered and lowered again, not only for students but also for staff and employees, workers at the university, that inevitably that would encourage activism, and that students would be, the way you can be a great citizen is just a placard wave and run around the street screaming, not about hitting the books and becoming a well-educated, doctor or whatever it might be. So, and also to expand the number of courses to make education accessible for people with an IQ of -5 million and this sort of thing in the interest of equity. So it was obvious to me that it was going to debase the entire currency, but that sort of fell on pretty much deaf ears. But that's where it is. So vast numbers have come in for just degree factory type interaction, and again, as they see this as either a backdoor to engage in labour hire type practices, or to get a backdoor to citizenship. Now, with the labour hire practices, what goes on, the scams there, somebody may come in as a student, but they're only allowed to work, the conditions of their visa, say 10 hours a week or something like that. I think it should be 0 for that. But anyway, people come in to study, they're supposed to be studying. The idea of getting a job as well. No. What? Local kids want those jobs. But what happens here is Chin Chon Chang comes and he gets his 10 hours a week, but then he just changed his name to Chong Chin Chang and then Chang Chon Chin, and so they just changed the name. So they regurgitate themselves with all these different names through these labour hire firms, and again, which are corrupt as fuck. And so they, Chin can then end up working 50, 60, 70 hours a week as a DoorDash deliverer or a pizza deliverer or flipping burgers or cooking fries or something like that. And that, given he's a peasant from the, out in some rural peasant from China or India or wherever it is, that then he's doing in his cognizance pretty good. But this is the amount of people that are sucked in. They're being brought in not for a quality education. It's a degree factory. Australia's become a mass degree factory. And then also these ghost colleges being scam labour hire thing. So if people were coming in just for a quality education, a rigorous merit-based quality education, instead of 1 million plus a year coming, you'd be lucky to get 50,000. Lucky to get 50,000 students. So the university sector and so on would be screaming, no, we can't have that. We want to be a degree fact. So that they've actively collaborated, I would argue, collaborated in debasing and devaluing their own product, so that it's now nothing more than some crazy leftist bullshit, job creation scheme for people who would otherwise be unemployable. The activist class and so on. I think so. But what are the other effects? Deleterious. What are the other negative effects on the Australian economy and the society? Is that you've got over 1 million people coming in who need somewhere to live, and they're clustering very much around the major cities. So, and various studies have claimed that between 25 and up to 30% even, but 26 seems to be a midpoint. 26% of all rental properties in Sydney or the big cities, and I'll use Sydney as a baseline here, 26% of the properties for rent are being rented out to foreign students. That's a colossal amount. I mean, that's a quarter plus. Of 1 in every 4 properties is being rented by foreign students that are really just scammers. They're not here for an education or anything like that. They're just third world corrupt, basket case third world corrupt scammers that are bribing the crap out of anything that moves. And so they even if they live 10 to a property, say with a 2-bedroom apartment, so then that's still 100,000 properties that are being rented by, let's suppose they live, as they often do, by the way, 20 to a property. And there'll be some from particularly wealthy families, by the way, and they'll have their own place and they'll probably buy property anyway. So they're maybe not even in the rental market, but even if they live 20 to that's still 50,000 properties Australia-wide and so on. So to give you an idea of the scale of it. Now, just a difference of a few thousand properties for rent in a section of the city can be enough to prevent rental price inflation. So that, given that 26% are being taken up by foreign students, then again, and the effect of this is that when landlords and property owners and this sort of thing, rental companies, they see that there's 20 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment. Now that's illegal, by the way. The authorities should be clamping down hard on that, but they don't. They look the other way, and the real estate people do, and the property owners do as well. So, well, you've got 20 people living there, so you can pay much higher rent than would otherwise be the case. So that again feeds into the artificial inflation of rental prices. No one's stopping it. But this is the corrosive and subversive effect. These are not market forces. These are not people, with families or jobs, 9-to-5 jobs, who want to rent a place to live. This is an outside mass influx of subversive forces that aren't allowing the natural local market forces to operate. Many of the properties that are being used for these rentals are often owned by Indians and Chinese as well, and they put these people in there and then have them working at the Indian curry houses or the Chinese restaurant or all this sort of bullshit, and then they package up their income as being the rents that they would pay in these properties, which are again owned by the same people that own the Chinese restaurant, and and on it goes. It creates this cycle and circle of corrupt practices that do nothing other than bleed the taxpayer, bleed the exchequer of revenue, and create these corrupt and cement these corrupt business practices being just the natural order of things in the West, which they never were before. So there's negative effects left, right, and centre, and our Western governments under globalist control and direction are just accepting this now as an inevitable consequence of bringing out all these third world peasants and all the corrupt practices whether it be turning once hallowed universities into just sleazy degree factories and so on. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.